Okay, welcome everybody from all over the world. I know that we've got quite a few participants joining us from many different countries. So welcome to you all to this webinar for GlobalNet21 on changing paradigms, where Melanie St. James and Peter Joseph will be doing a webinar between them on the Global Summit that's happening here in London, and also what's happening in the world on a bigger scale concerning some of the things that Peter Joseph actually discussed in his movie Zeitgeist, and what he's been pursuing through the Zeitgeist movement. What I'm going to do at this point in time is just hand over to Melanie, who's going to manage the next half hour, and she's responsible for the Global Summit that's going to be happening here in London and activities associated with it around the world. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Melanie St. James, and I'm going to just stop my broadcast so that her head.
Hello everyone, welcome. This is the first of 4 webinars leading up to the Global Summit. The purpose of today's webinar is to lay the foundation and really go in deep to inspire you, listening to Peter and hearing a bit about what the Global Summit's about, to see what's calling you to action. The next 3 webinars will be the first 3 stages to sustainability out of 7. Building a team, assessing our assets, and how to co-create a plan. This is very important because when we see the big picture, then we can really dive in and know who to call into that team. So just for the next few minutes, I'd like to present what's calling me to action and lay the foundation for this next month leading up to August 15th to 17th. Our mission is to bring together the world's social, economic, and environmental movements. When this vision first came about, I was actually at the World Social Forum in Kenya in 2007 and saw that the social movement had so many grassroots people on the front lines really working on issues of climate change, social justice, economic sustainability, and the people who had the power to influence these choices were in Davos, and they were the enemy. And just thought, wow, if we could have a framework where we weren't making anyone wrong and really take this idea of locally led solutions to every sector, what could we create? So this is one of the outcomes. It's actually a whole system redesign of our policymaking system, and not necessarily to replace any government or be the UN, but at least have a transparent platform where all voices are truly heard and where we're really putting the latest in information communication technologies to use so that things are transparent. Diverse languages, all the input systems, it's time. I think there's a million groups working on different technologies to do this, and we'd love to bring them together as we grow every other year. 7 stages to sustainability, which is kicking off next Thursday, is not only something that we had developed from Africa, but I found out after our first summit that it's actually a pattern that's found in nature. It's a pattern that is inherent in technology development. Many people have 7 stages of something. There's actually something to it. If you've seen the movie Thrive, there's the Merkaba that they talk about, and it also follows this. We'll see that later. My family has a background in green technology, and I also have a background in medicinal plant-based treatments, and found that there was a real barrier to entry. And so this transfer of sustainable technology is really, really relying on critical mass collaboration so that we can get around the status quo and really bring what works to the masses. So these are just 8 categories of technology that we have a platform to bring to light. So we're going to be disseminating these technologies virtually. The director of our Sustainable Technology Showcase is in India and collecting those, so you can stay tuned for those outcomes of the Global Summit in the coming weeks. And these partners in empowerment are not the only people that we'd like to bring together, but it's just a simple overview of communities that can be found in a village or they can be found in New York City. And the idea is that they can either be a civic engagement vehicle or it can be a community action vehicle for a local community to say, you know what, we're going to create our own self-governance system. Moving forward, we're also developing together a larger network that's based on merit, and we're really looking at what are the highest levels of contribution that a business can make. What's the best thing that an educational institution can bring to the table? And together, by bringing the best that we have, we build a better world for humanity. And here's the rollout plan. We started in San Francisco in 2008, further developed the project in 2010. And this year in London, with the Olympics, represents our effort to harness some of that 3 billion numbers to focus on the issues of climate change, social justice, etc. And we'll be going to Russia in 2014, then to Rio and South Korea, and we're planning on aligning with the World Fair actually in 2020. So stay tuned and mark your calendars. And this is the 7 stages roadmap. We start in our local communities, and that's exactly what these webinars are doing. So stage 1, 2, and 3 are what we do at home and in our backyards. And then stage 4 and 7 are delivered in the Global Summit as workshop series. And when all of our sectors learn these and exchange their own skills and their visions and tools in these 7 stages, the idea is that we create a larger global community of practice and that we actually can have a real breakthrough in collaboration. It's like a pattern language. And through the Global Summit and through the online exchanges and collaboration networks, we're actually building a larger knowledge base called OnePi. And that's up in beta right now. And here's where we are in our development. We're really focused on having direct engagement in the Global Summit, in debates, in dialogues, and road testing this system for the future. This focuses on how we'll support local solutions around the year. The Synergy Fund is a way to incentivize trainings and education in 7 stages to sustainability and essentially flip philanthropy from the top down, which can really create greater dependence on donors, to saying, let's focus on the local assets first. And essentially, this is the new philanthropy system that we're really advocating and really inviting donors and grassroots leaders to work together on developing. Beyond that, when we talk about the big goal, these slides actually were created by a co-founder that was at the Central European University, and he was working on the relationship between foreign aid and development and looking at the policy system. You know, what's wrong with this picture is we have the same people, you know, doing everything, and then the rest of society is not involved with government or governance. Same thing, you know, most of society isn't involved with community development. It's something that we, you know, donate a little bit of money to and expect somebody else to take care of it. And essentially what we're advocating is that we get involved in changing things. Everyone gets involved. So here we've got a little diagram of all sectors of society being involved in the policy formulation, decision-making, implementing, evaluating, setting the agenda, and analyzing what's going on. These are skills that just imagine if everyone wrapped their head around it. There's a lot of barriers, but you know, we got to do something different, right? And beyond the Global Summit, we have a year-round follow-up plan. In April this year, we started with our first African local summit in Ghana and did cell phone voting to get input from delegates after to help us identify what issues are most vital to local communities that we should address at the Global Summit. So this is really marks a new era for our movement. So we'll be having local summits around the world in 2013, and then we'll come back to the 2014 Global Summit. And this is the big picture tying it all together. And I'm very happy to hear your thoughts when we have Q&A, and to turn it over to Peter to focus on the economic system. Thank you.
Hi Peter, can you just start your video now, and then you can join us and we can begin your presentation. Wait for you to do that, okay. And then we'll begin. Thank you. Great, I'll switch off mine and hand over to you, and it's all yours. Thank you very much, Peter.
Hello, everybody. I'm switching over the slide right now. Can everybody hear me okay? Good. So I want to thank Melanie for a wonderful introduction and this vast network that she's working to create in the 7 stages of sustainability. Someone asked if I was in agreement with this approach, and by all means, the approach, as anything in activism, has to have some type of uniform unfolding. We can get into details about how to best affect society in many different ways as far as detail, transition. But what's unique about the presentation I'm going to give, which is slightly in anticipation of this, is really what comes down to the definition of sustainability itself. So we can think about the stages of applying sustainability and getting people active in such a way, but unless people have a very clear understanding of what it means to be sustainable, we might end up running in circles. So I hope that this presentation I'm about to give, called The Big Picture, Sourcing Human Sustainability, will give some insight into the way I and the Zeitgeist Movement think about things. So, by the way, there's some text issues in the format that I've noticed with the presentation as it was converted, so please ignore the issue if you see that. The other slides seem to be okay. So, the formal beginning. My name is Peter Joseph, and welcome to The Big Picture, Sourcing Human Sustainability. As some may know, I work with a global sustainability advocacy group called the Zeitgeist Movement. This organization, as the very name implies, seeks to transition away from our dominant values and practices, the current zeitgeist, which, as I'm going to argue, has proven to be increasingly detrimental to human and environmental well-being today, as they appear to be very much decoupled from governing natural physical laws. Very quickly, the Zeitgeist Movement considers the vast majority of problems in the world, such as poverty, the debt crisis, the unemployment epidemic, the ecological destabilization, and the like, as literally unresolvable within the current social structure in place, as they appear to be actually inherent to the system itself. Therefore, in order to overcome such issues, we need to start considering larger, more radical, if you will, changes to the very nature of the socioeconomic system itself. And the goal of our organization is to not only help arrive at what could define a truly sustainable, environment, a humane social system in effect, but also to find a means to transition, just as Melanie has been working to assist with as well. So, that introduction aside, I would like to start with a question. What is sustainability? Is it merely an ecological notion, such as trying to be green, as we often hear with respect to industrial methods and the like? What about the economic system? Is the very manner of conduct reinforced by our market economy actually conducive to the tenets of a truly sustainable approach? Or better yet, what about psychology? Since at the core of all social institutions are people and their motivations, what about the relevance of human psychology itself, and hence the culminated sociological condition that defines normality as we know it? Is the underlying dominant psychology in the world today actually in line overall with the true definition of sustainability itself? Or are we walking as a whole, as a society, literally against the tide, if you will, unknowingly, ignorantly, perpetuating outdated and inapplicable beliefs and methods that are further compounding the growing societal crises we are experiencing today? If you think about it, the term sustainable essentially implies the maintaining of balance within a governing system. On the ecological level, a simple example is the concept of dynamic equilibrium, if you're familiar. And when it applies to, say, a natural resource harvesting like wood, obviously if we harvest trees faster than the rate of natural earthly regeneration, we have a clearly unsustainable practice. However, the consideration of sustainability gets more complicated as we extend out, and the symbiotic relationship of the natural world system and its physical scientific laws come into play in a very important way. Needless to say, it's not a profound notion, but unfortunately it's not given the credence it deserves. Building on the prior example, the clearing of forests for wood is also found to have much larger subtle effects, at least in perception, which can inhibit human sustainability over time to a very, very, very detrimental degree, such as the obvious reality that forests as a whole have a massive ecological role in and of themselves, which, if disturbed, can cause problems such as soil erosion, carbon dioxide imbalance, loss of life-saving biodiversity, and many other consequences to the human condition, even though on the surface, we are often not aware of such things. It has taken science to figure out these relationships. And when you extend this logical inference more so, stepping back and considering this symbiotic interrelationship of the world, you will inevitably draw the conclusion that the only context we can possibly consider applying a truly sustainable practice as a species is in the context of acknowledging the total Earth system and its inherent natural physical laws. I'll state that again because it's critical. The only possible context which can embody a truly sustainable approach is the recognition and alignment with the largest system reference conceivable. Now, that might seem abstract to many, maybe even ambiguous. But once this scientific systems theory, if you will, once this approach is understood with respect to how we, the human species, are to align with pre-existing natural laws, you will discover that the entire basis of our current global society, from the divided nation states to the competing market economy to the dominant religious and philosophical institutions, is actually walking against the natural order of reality when it comes to human survival, public health, sustainability, prosperity, and even against our evolutionary fitness. As we are not adapting sufficiently enough, as we are being held back, in fact, by stubborn, established customs, and the world you see around you, full of imbalance, decay, disorder, and conflict, is the consequence and result. Since the beginning of recorded history, the scientific premise of reality, meaning the nature and dynamics of causality in and of itself, has been given very little respect, unfortunately. To our detriment, the major value structures and establishments in human history thus far have been oriented around largely superstitious, surface intuitive, if you will, traditional views of ourselves, our environment, and the quality of our behaviors and practices. It has taken a great deal of time and suffering for the humbling foundational notion that we, humans, are governed by a larger order rule set, physical law, and rather than impose our traditional cultural values upon the world to our disadvantage in the end, we must learn to start respecting and adapting to these pre-existing rules on all levels. Nature, needless to say, really doesn't care what you or I think is good, bad, moral, ethical, or correct in our opinionated world. It has its own agenda. So, when we step back and examine the dominant customary practice of our global culture today, from the economic game to politics to industry to philosophy, we find a detachment, a decoupling. We're out of sync from what science is telling us about proper alignment with physical governing natural laws, and hence the ultimate definitional referent of the term sustainability. So, that overview noted, I'm going to now make some comparisons between our current economic tradition and what basic science has now shown us with respect to what true global economic sustainability actually requires. But let's first remind ourselves what an economy actually is. Economy in Greek means the management of a household. It means efficiency in reducing waste. The term economize. Keep that in mind as we go along. We're going to use two terms for this comparison. The first we're going to call abstractly a natural law economy, which doesn't exist at this point, at least not in application, which would essentially be defined as the following. Decisions are directly based upon scientific understandings as they relate to optimized habitat management and human health. Production and distribution is regulated by the most technically efficient and sustainable approaches known. Now we're going to compare this to our current market economy as it is practiced today, defined as decisions are based on independent human actions through the vehicle of monetary exchange, regulated by the pressures of supply and demand. Production and distribution is enabled by the buying and selling of labor and material provisions with the motivations of the person or group, competitive self-interest, in other words, as the defining attribute of unfolding. Okay, here is a list of 7 economic attributes of each economic model in contextual comparison, all of which I'm going to address one by one. You'll notice the asterisks at the bottom have to do with issues that relate to informational advancements in science and technology, which is, of course, a part of a scientific-based economic system. It isn't just physical in the material sense. It also has to do with knowledge and method. This will become more clear as we move forward. Point one, actually, consumption. As noted on the left of this slide, the market economy is driven by consumption. That is the fuel, if you will, that keeps people employed and maintains purchasing power. If consumption was to stop or significantly slow, all life-supporting processes enabled are stifled. The world economy today is really based on one thing, turnover through sales, period. How does that compare to the demands of the natural world, as noted on the right side of this slide? The ethic is really the opposite, preservation. The earth is a finite, closed system for the most part, and the reduction of waste, and hence true economic efficiency by definition, is demanded to be sustainable. That is, again, the true definition of an economy. Point 2, obsolescence. This isn't something people talk about very often, but it's very much a part of what we're doing in the market economy. Obsolescence, as noted on the left, is the market economy's way of maintaining market share through repeat purchases. There's 2 forms of obsolescence, intrinsic and planned. Intrinsic obsolescence has to do with the cost-cutting necessity of companies. In order to remain affordable and competitive against other companies that are cost-cutting as well, to undercut them for market share. It's called cost efficiency in traditional economics. The result? Immediately inferior products the moment they are made. It is impossible to make the best of anything at the time of the knowledge that's available for us because of cost efficiency. The next one is planned obsolescence, which is much worse. During the Great Depression in the United States, the need for turnover to boost the economy brought about the idea of deliberately reducing good quality for the sake of turnover. Huge economic praise and awards were given to these people who decided, let's just reduce the quality of goods so people have to buy more of them so we can keep people employed to make bad goods again so they can stay employed. Again, is this truly economically efficient? Obviously, that's a rhetorical question. Well, it is considered efficient in the market economy. We should point that out. But it is completely inefficient with respect to natural law. And as noted on the right, natural law demands optimum design, longevity, logical enough. It's environmentally irresponsible to design goods to fail or to allow them to fail unnecessarily, yet it is a universal practice today and needed to keep our economic system in operation. Point 3, property. A foundational premise of the market economy is singular ownership. It's a metaphysical notion if you think about it, because both ideas and physical goods are transient and serially developed. The result is a mass repeat duplication of items and a wasting of resources and energy, not to mention time. What does nature have to say about this? Well, universal property is simply inefficient. Strategic access, if you will, is more environmentally responsible as a model and more socially efficient as well. For if we consider the actual use of the good instead, we find a method of shared access distribution, not blind ownership, can preserve resources while also meeting the needs of more people because of the nature of a strategic access system. We have examples of this in very minimalistic forms. You can go to certain countries that have bikes on the street that you can put some change in and ride around with and return. We, of course, have Zipcar, which is a phenomenon in New York City. It's a brilliant idea. But unfortunately, it goes against the grain, even though those subtle aspects actually are in place. It's an ownership society, unfortunately, and that's very detrimental in the long term. You know, I, for example, I'm a filmmaker. I have tons of film equipment. I would rather not have to house this stuff in my closets. I would prefer to rent it when I need it because I don't use it all the time. However, in a monetary society based on ownership, not access, it's literally unaffordable for me to do that. It costs more money in the long run because I have no investment in that good to resell it. And that's where this ownership thing becomes a self-generating negative retroaction, if you will, of the concept of property. It's extremely primitive, frankly, and environmentally unethical, especially primitive given the advanced technology we have today to assist in an access society in a way that was unconceivable before. Point 4, growth. The market economy not only needs consumption in general, it actually requires growth, and often increasing rates of growth. This is always, of course, the conversation of governments. You know, how often do you turn on the news? And we need more growth, they say. Well, what does the natural world think about infinite growth in society? Obviously, as implied before, the Earth is a balanced system. It demands a balanced load economy respecting dynamic equilibrium. Anything else is really quite incompatible in the long run. We need a steady state economy. That is the term, a steady state economy, which in fact could only be the nature, again, of a truly economic social practice on that level. Point 5, competition. This gets into the development of scientific and human study explicitly, because competition has been a mythological issue for a long time based on very primitive instincts that go back to periods of heavy scarcity. The market economy's operational incentive premise is competition through the pursuit of self-interest. It is based, as noted, upon personal and corporate competition in the open market. However, emerging sociological and psychological studies now show long-term distortion with the competitive view. Please see researchers such as Daniel Pink or Alfie Cohen for more details on this issue. Not to mention, needless to say, frankly, competition is at the core of an enormous number of justified atrocities and inhumanity across the world. Overall, it simply isn't necessary for human progress, as this traditional theory pretends that we simply can't operate in a collaborative way on the level of basic human organization. It causes far more problems today than it does progressive innovation. That's for sure. People use the incentive innovation excuse for competition all the time. And it's been found, in fact, that that isn't the case. Creative processes actually are inhibited by the competitive mentality, for example. This is a huge subject to examine, not the scope of what I want to do today, but collaboration and the sharing of ideas, not the hiding of them through corporate proprietary claims, could catapult progress on this planet to an extent never before seen if we chose to begin to work together on that level. Imagine if all the cell phone companies got together, rather than competing with each other, and decided to take their same ideas and unify themselves to create the absolute best based on a scientific reference of what's actually possible. Imagine the efficiency that would be created. Imagine the loss of the intrinsic obsolescence that I just denoted prior as well, and how much more sustainable, that word again, things would be. Point 6. Labor for income. As we know, we work in a system where your right to life, as it were, is based upon earning income through labor in some way. That could be considered, in fact, a core driver of everything, of the basis of the system, since we started economics as far as the custom is concerned. For many millennia, it has been inconceivable that the human mind would give birth to such a massive paradigm-shifting invention that we have today, a phenomenon called mechanization, which is the automation of human labor. The advent of automation is now making human employment more scarce at a minimum and definitely obsolete in many sectors. It is also more productive and efficient than human labor and safer, which means from a truly humane economic standpoint, it is literally irresponsible for us not to apply this technique in all areas we can, which is applicable again in virtually all sectors now. You know, I'm sure we've all used an electric drill. If you had the choice to use a hand drill or an electric drill, what would you choose? I will also add that the unemployment crisis in this world, unannounced to most, is driven entirely by technology replacing human labor. Now, you have to look at the broad scheme. Really, the entire displacement, the entire movement of all of our sectors through time and human history has been based on the incorporation of technology. So, point 7, scarcity and imbalance. Money moves due to imbalance, scarcity, and inefficiency. Players in the market economy can maintain no advantage if there is any kind of equilibrium in society. Deprivation and needs outstanding are a positive factor in the market economy, and the enormous class divide and poverty you see as a result, this is built in. It's not going to be resolved through governmental regulation, policy, and new organizations. If there was balance and needs being met in society, the market system would fail. I'm sorry that sounds dramatic, but if you really think about it, it's actually true. Needless to say, our public health is dependent on a number of factors, and the natural laws governing human systems requires that our needs be met, or we will develop sickness, disease, neuroses, and various negative propensities. The natural law economy, as denoted on the right side of this slide, recognizes that shared universal human needs, we have to make this first priority. Shared universal human needs are first priority for any society organizing itself with the intention to actually take care of its population. Otherwise, we all continue to suffer. Also, it has been found that on the social level, equality is much more positive for public health psychologically than stratification. This goes back in context to competition in a certain way as well. Our stratified society is a foundational cause of a vast spectrum of problems. And the more stratified a given society, the more unhealthy and violent that society is. The United States is a perfect example. We have one of the most stratified countries in the world, and we also have one of the most outrageous violence rates, crime rates, mental disorder rates, and other issues that can be causally linked to this psychological, sociological phenomenon. I really recommend the work of Richard Wilkinson and Kate Pickett on this issue. So, Putting all of this together, what we have today is what I call the spectrum of social disorder. The consequences are all the basic issues we hear about in the public media today. Debt collapse, pollution, disorders, resource depletion, increasing cancer rates, poverty, unemployment, growing wealth gaps. This relationship of our macroeconomic model to the species is extremely detrimental and unhealthy, and by definition, extremely unsustainable in the long term. And there's many other things I could say on this subject, but for the course of time, I want to conclude and leave you with one final point. We often hear this word corruption. On a daily basis, this word is now presented to us. What is corruption? When the hard drive on your computer corrupts, what's happening? Something's out of sync with the governing hardware that's installed, or software, whatever. Likewise, in society, when a person goes and robs a bank, they are violating governing legal systems and of this social model, and therefore they are deemed corrupt by that association. If there is any point, again, I would like to leave you, it is the consideration that maybe the entire social system from top to bottom that we employ is actually existing as an inherent corruption in and of itself of the true emerging governing natural law system of the earth that I have been referencing in this presentation as a natural law economy. And if that is true, which I hope has been made clear on some level in the prior examples, we are faced with a very radical imperative in conclusion. And that is that true societal improvement can only come from a total system redesign to a new model that actually respects and adapts to true governing principles of the natural world. And that is the big picture. Thank you very much for listening. I appreciate this opportunity. I'm Peter Joseph.
Thank you very much, Peter, for that very enlightening presentation. Melanie, if you want to switch on your video as well. Then what we'll do is we'll switch over to the discussion view, which allows us to look at all the chat that's coming through and for us to answer any questions around that. So let's just expand this out a bit, and then we'll be kind of ready to do that. There we go. Okay, it should be extended a bit. Right, okay. Right, so this is the time for people to post any questions that they have towards Melanie or towards Peter. And I'll let Melanie and Peter, between them, answer the questions as they come in. And if I see any that they have not looked at yet, then I'll point that out to them. But perhaps I should begin by asking both Melanie and Peter, if people were to wake up tomorrow morning, what are the two questions that they should ask themselves in terms of, one, what they should be trying to change their thinking on, and two, what they should perhaps be trying to change in terms of the way that they're actually acting. So how should they think differently each morning, and how should they perhaps act differently each morning? Do you have a couple of questions that people might find really critical to explore every morning that they wake up, given the things that you're describing are going on in the world? Please,
but I think I understood your question. As far as what people need to begin to think about, as far as I'm concerned, is they need to get out of the box. They need to begin to think about things from on a level that doesn't reference cultural tradition, at least initially. I'm not saying that transition to a new design, a societal design that's truly sustainable, can't incorporate elements of our current traditions. Obviously, they're going to have to, which is why I respect, the very premise of this whole concept that we're talking about is how do we even get to these places? And that is really the ultimate question. Unfortunately, though, most people I run into, they really do frame their awareness of activism within the traditional notion of activism in the box. And they think, for example, that through governmental regulation of corporations alone, they're going to be able to resolve the issues entirely. But I feel, and this is what I argue, that the very basis of business as its tradition exists in the market economy really won't allow for such things at a certain point. There's only so far you can go by trying to affect the current system in its consistent dynamic. So that is the biggest thing, and it's very hard to deal with, and I don't pretend to know how to do that. I don't pretend to know the way you can make this move, except through mostly grassroots action, because I have very little confidence that the established political and financial systems really are incentivized to move forward into something new that will really benefit the whole of humanity. I'll conclude by saying that throughout the whole course of human history, it's been very much accepted that certain classes prevail and other classes perish. And sadly, that tradition persists. We have 3 billion people starving on this planet. One person dies every couple of seconds unnecessarily. That is a consequence of the larger global economic model. And that reality, unfortunately, is considered normality. And most people, especially in the West, they just don't care. They don't realize that what an atrocity unnecessarily that even is. So the first issue is apathy. The second issue is real awakening of the awareness of the intrinsic flaws. And the third issue, which is why Melanie and all of us are here, is how do we actually think about transitioning step by step into a new model?
Thank you very much, Peter. I think what you said about getting out of the box is really important, and some of the things you mentioned earlier about needs, especially in terms of natural law, it's really important. Happiness, some time ago somebody asked me, what do you think happiness actually is? And I said, well, it's about getting your needs met and making sure that that's all that you want. If you want to if you think your needs are about what you want, then you're going to go down the route of consumerism and addiction and things like that. On the other hand, if all you ever want is to attend to your genuine needs, then in getting those particular needs met, all that's going to happen is you're going to end up being very empowered, which is the complete opposite of addiction. I'd certainly like to see that for society as well as for individuals. Melanie, well, what do you think about what are the questions that people should wake up each morning and ask themselves to think about and act on?
What do you want to create? What's your? Can you hear me? Okay, great. Yeah. So what's really your passion? What's going to keep you moving and into action and sustain you? What's going to get you out of bed and what's going to give you hope? I know I can't live without feeling like what I'm doing is going to ensure my survival and make the world better. So I'm just assuming that other people have the same reaction and the similar needs. What's going to drive you? And I just wanted to take this opportunity to say I love where, Peter, you ended your presentation with that we need a whole system redesign. And I think I was just listening to a presentation by Otto Scharmer, I'm probably pronouncing his name wrong, but from Theory U philosophy and U process, and saying we need more whole system leaders. And so that's just that whole philosophy of like, how do we create that? How can we look at the whole system that we're living in, whether it's our global community or our local community or whatever it is, and start taking action, go a step further. It's not as easy as turning on the TV, but what is the blind spot right in front of us? There's another question here. Corporation versus community, which is more empowering?
Somebody asked earlier, somebody mentioned earlier that surely a corporation's remit is for a group of people to come together and to trade more effectively than individuals acting alone. But I think my point there was there are two kinds of structures that can do that. There's the corporation and there's the community. And I think the community, especially in ancient times, followed more the natural law, whereas corporation is obviously following the market law in the way that Peter's talking about. What do you say to that, Peter? There's someone saying that, corporation, surely that's the point of the corporation. Is corporation the only way in which people can get together and do something to make a difference to themselves as well as go beyond themselves?
Well, I think that's a unique question, because in a lot of ways, and I don't mean to debase the question, it's making a presumption, is it not? What is a corporation? A corporation really is it's an institution that produces something that's supposed to have a public relevance, to provide a service for the public. A corporation is really just a factory that produces something to meet the needs or provide services or even the wants of the human population. So if you break everything down to what the real operation is, and I don't mean corporation as, a private institution with shareholders, you can throw all that to the side because that's really just this abstraction that we've concocted in our unfolding of the system. The real purpose of the corporation is to do something that's to provide for humanity. So the question becomes, what can we do to assist in the providing of humanity through industry in the most efficient, sustainable, and humane way? And when you begin to think that way, the idea of a corporation becomes non-existent. So I don't agree with the corporate concept in and of itself, because it's based on a faulty premise of competition. It's based on a premise of preserving an institution at the expense of others. That's what a corporation does. Now, that's stated. It doesn't mean that I am naive enough to think that tomorrow somehow we remove all corporations. No. There are regulations that we can put forward. There are different forms of practices that really should be implemented, but they are fought by the underlying ethic of the competitive market model. They are fought because they don't really present advantage. So if a corporation really wanted to be humane in their work, they would lose out to other corporations that are more cutthroat, and they would fail very rapidly in the market economy. So you see there's a clash. It's very, very hard to create humane, sustainable practices through the market economy because of the very ethic that underscores it. So to answer the question, it's community, obviously. Community is the most empowering because it actually goes down to the core of what a society is, which is the sharing of resources. Even the market economy is still the sharing of resources, even though it operates in sort of an antithetical manner where people have to kind of extract and fight for them. But still, the end game is the sharing of resources. But it's the method that's flawed. So I think the community has to begin to think about it.
I think you're right. What you've mentioned there, I think, with regards to corporation and community, they operate on two fundamentally different principles. Obviously, the corporation works with competition, and the community generally tends to work with collaboration. But I'll be frank, and this goes to a question that Grant's just put down, which is about perhaps Zeitgeist Movement working in partnership with other organisations and going beyond perhaps situational events where these matters are being discussed in a talking shop. There's a point which is you've got to go beyond just constructing the ideas at a certain point and treating this just as a philosophy. You've got to go out and start making this a practice. And this is where I'm wondering, based on what Grant said, Peter, what are you doing at the moment to collaborate with people in real-world organisations to make what you're talking about in terms of natural law start to get acted on in a collaborative way?
We're doing everything that most activist groups do. Obviously, it's an educational imperative. One of the real serious problems is that culture today has become so indoctrinated in these practices that I, for example, can't even bring up an alternative to the market economy without being called a communist or a socialist or something. They have this mind lock. So education and really starting to get people to open up is the very first step. And I can't express that enough. If people want to live in a society that's free, they need to understand the society. The reason people are regulated in the current system and oppressed is because they're completely ignorant of the inherent nature of the system, both as it exists and the natural law economy I just speak of. So human freedom, as an aside, is equated to how much they understand the world they live in. So that stated, we have a project called the Global Redesign Institute that's on the sidelines. And what this is a digital platform that will serve in a way as a digital graphic Wikipedia that will bring in people with tangible information, sourcing, tracking systems of the earth, where resources are, to begin to literally digitally redesign the entire planet from the ground up technically, based on what's efficient, not based on the market system, not based on the motives of ownership and the distribution. I mean, think about how industry is dispersed. Because of the profit system, we have stuff all over the place. We have a factory here, and we have a distribution center here, then we have an assembly line here, we have a processing plant here, all across the world called globalization. one of the most wasteful things that we could possibly have come up with. Why not centralize all of that? And that's part of the point of the Global Redesign Institute. And to answer your question, I believe once the public sees the fruits of this and they realize how sustainable and how much better life can be with this approach, they will begin to turn away from the current model. But again, even that is an educational imperative.
Melanie, you obviously linked up with Peter with regards to the Global Summit. Can you just share what you're hoping to do in conjunction?
Well,
with,
it's one of the
Zeitgeist
most whole system activist movements that's, and it's also transitioning. If you look at just my observation briefly about the Zeitgeist movement, it started with, here's what's wrong, and then with addendum, looking at the economic system, and then really beautifully and moving forward, looking at what our drivers are. And so there's a lot of different activist groups that I not just activists, but social movements. There's tribal convergence in California. There's, we all move into tribes, right? And so even though like maybe Peter and I might share an identical philosophy, or there's the eradicating ecocide movement, and they're really looking at the whole system of property law and making ecocide a crime against peace, and shifting the system from within the system. Everyone's got a different strategy, and at the end of the day, it's like, how can we evolve as leaders? So, how can I join forces heart to heart to say, like, can we bring our movements together? Can we agree on some kind of critical mass collaboration so that these different models can be joined so that we can have collective intelligence? And that's what the Global Summit is. It's, we're a tiny, tiny grassroots group of volunteers who are bringing together really way larger movements than our own to demonstrate the power of collaboration. And it's by being really small that I think maybe we're less of a threat than if it were a large group saying, join us. If we were a large group, our board might not want to collaborate as openly. We've kind of got nothing to lose. And I think humanity has a whole lot to lose if we don't just say, how can we unite? What can we do together? What are the big balls that we can push forward? And I'm just looking at this this chat right here. Changing the paradigm is experience. Changing the truth people hear, believe, and act on. What's gonna create a sense of security through collaboration? I think that's the big test right now. It needs to happen at all levels. So just on this webinar, like Polly Higgins is coming into it, and I'm hearing what you're saying with your system that you're describing, and I'd love to have some of the other leaders that I'm talking to participate in that. And maybe you're further along in your design than what we've created. Maybe we could launch an aspect of that at the Global Summit. Where's the system map that's bringing these movements together? That's my question.
Well, that'd be great.
So what's I think, how do we weave the best of what each of these movements has done and really open it up to humanity? There's a lot of smaller movements going on.
Well, I think what you just said about the smaller movements is kind of what's happening, but unfortunately, in a lot of places in history, it started happening in a negative sense. And nowhere is this more the case than with terrorism. As the world governments try and battle terrorism, what terrorists are doing and actually becoming much more effective in as a consequence is they're becoming leaderless tribes that between themselves are being able to bring about change and impact in different parts of the world. But there's no reason why the same model can't be used for a positive purpose, where people who just get together based on what they have in common and in terms of their aspirations to make a difference, if they come together with a common and resonant relationship, then they don't need to have a leader. They just need to have a direction which is common and intention about how to move along that direction that resonate with each other as well. I think you're right. The smaller groups of people out there, the little tribes that are all forming, especially through social networks, Occupy movement is obviously an example of that, but you've got little movements that are happening throughout the world. And I think when you provide a focus for all those little movements, that's when you'll get a chain reaction. That's when you get shifts starting to happen, which are just not mental, but they will be material, and they will be social, they will be governmental. And I feel that in the air. I just feel that in the air at the moment. I see what you're doing, Melanie, and what you're doing, Peter, and I certainly know what other groups are doing. Here in England, we did a webinar a little earlier on how people share, and the leader of that particular group, who's promoting sharing here in the UK and a high level of that collaboration in organisations, went to see the Prime Minister to be congratulated for her work. So we know these movements are existing. It's just a matter of convincing people with the evidence and the experiences that they are making a genuine difference. So let me just ask Peter, what evidence have you got that what you're working with is actually making a difference now?
Good question. How do we know the effect that we're having? I mean, there are hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands now, of emerging so-called sustainability organizations. I saw a Paul Hawken lecture where he listed this enormous number of people and organizations out there. So there's change happening one way or another, at least the intent of change is certainly on the horizon. As far as the effect, I mean, I can't speak for the movement or myself. We do the best we can. We have our chapters across the world. We have our event days. We feel like we're planting seeds. You know, there's other organizations like the Venus Project, the Buckminster Fuller Institute, the Singularity Institute, and they're all walking similar scientifically based lines. I can't emphasize that word enough. My real issue now is communicating a train of thought. And that isn't to tell people what sustainability is. It's to teach them, or not even teach them, just to show them what defines sustainability based on the natural world. This natural scientific alignment that we are being forced into one way or another. Even if we go extinct, it will be the hand of natural law that does it. So we have to align ourselves, and that's what I'm trying my best to communicate. And I do feel that we're beginning to see more of this train of thought emerge. As far as the effect of the movement, it's hard to say. You know, you have someone watch a movie, it could be interpreted in certain ways. They talk to their friends, their friend goes to the head of some corporation, boom, you have no idea what they might do. I was, for example, very fortunate to meet the head of Solaris, which was just acquired by Siemens, CEO. I met him in Israel, and he was very much behind everything we talked about. He was an engineer, and he was another point of focus. He surprised me so much with his identification, something I typically don't expect, because to be perfectly frank, most people don't take myself or the movement seriously in the traditional political and corporate world. We're too fringe, because what we talk about is too broad and extent. But it is seeds of planting, and you never know where they'll grow. And that's what keeps me going. I have no idea how this will actually emerge, per se, even though I can think of ideas. But I know that we're planting seeds, and that's the best we can do for now, and we'll see where they take me.
Well, that's an important kind of attitude to take, where you're a farmer, you may not know what kind of crop you're going to get, but you know you're not going to get any if you don't plant the seeds. You know, so I'm conscious, though, that there are lots of visionaries in the world, and I'm certainly familiar with Jack Fisco. He had a movie made about him by an Academy Award winner director that I was also in a movie with, in a completely different movie. And he's got some amazing visions, and he's got amazing pedigree in terms of his science. Now, there's a phrase that someone said to me a long time ago, and it really stuck with me, because it really made me check in with about my visions and how realistic were they really going to make a difference. And you know, on TV they was talking about a person who committed suicide, and they were talking about him and saying he had a great vision. Unfortunately, he didn't have the talent to fulfill it. And that's the reason why he committed suicide. And I wonder sometimes, you know, whether human beings or cultures think that way about themselves. They look at the potential, and then they realise that they can't seem to manifest it, and they kind of give up, and they go for the easy route, the market route, rather than the natural route, if you like. And it makes me concerned that there's lots of people with visions, but there seems to be very few who can turn those visions into ventures. How are you going to recruit those people who are the engineers, the converters between the visions and the ventures?
Well, I mean, the human interest to want to see a better society should take precedence over every other tradition that we have. So, people often ask me about fundraising. For example, the Zeitgeist Movement doesn't raise any money at all for anything. Only really tiny temporal projects someone might throw up a chip in or something. We do this because of the ethic inherent. We're not interested in money. We're interested in people's values changing. Now, when it comes to website things, I'm in a position of basically funding the majority of the websites and things like that, which I do perfectly fine. I'm capable of. But beyond that, it's really a shift of cultural values. And we hope that the ideas and those all it takes is one big conglomerate, corporation or anything to see this and use their resources to begin to say, build a test technologically, or to do things with respect to sustainable practices like creating wireless energy, using geothermal, or using extremely advanced methods of solar that are out there that aren't being used because they're simply too efficient. It's going to take somebody with a lot of courage on the economic side that plays the economic game to probably trigger something of relevance, because they know they're going to lose. I actually have some friends that are actually involved. Douglas Millett, who's a part of the organization, is founding a corporation that is going to work to feed the poverty-stricken, and his goal is to make his corporation obsolete over time, because he's not actually seeking profit to do it. He's seeking to employ the systems that he's considering. So one way or another, we're walking against the grain. And anyone working in the monetary system, of course, is in bed with the devil one way or another, ethically and in principle. But what else can you do except plant the seeds of the education and hope that those with money will use it for the right purposes? And that's probably the most difficult aspect of all of this. Money corrupts just about everything. That's another reason we don't use money in the movement, because it messes things up. We don't want to become reliant on an activist institution for income to pay people so they can survive. If you think about that, that's why you have a cancer establishment that isn't using real cures. That's why I have a medical establishment that likes to keep people sick over time. They don't think about it that way, but it's so profitable to maintain these problems. It's so profitable to have polluted water, so you can take bottled water and charge people more than a gallon of gasoline for it. Problems equal money, and we don't want to create that issue with the movement. So to answer your question, I just went all over the place. My hope is that some larger institution will realize the light of this, and they will move forward to help assist in a way that could actually put a dent in the system. Otherwise, we just continue our educational processes. I hope that answers your question. It's very tricky. Sorry, everybody just dropped out for a second.
Yeah, that's good. I think some of the things that you've highlighted, perhaps that's something you can segue into, Melanie. You work with the Global Summit. You're doing things already physically in the world, in Africa and other countries, and you're an example of someone who, like Peter, has decided to not just talk about things, but create things in the real world which people can access and start to use as a foundation for thinking about how to act differently and being different as well. So can you just give us a brief of how you yourself have taken your vision, what
thank you, and thanks so much, Peter, for everything.
Turn it into a real world thing, turn your vision into a venture.
This started actually on the ground with very real, tangible projects in Africa, working with orphans, AIDS, prevention, working to turn medicinal plant knowledge into jobs, and it was like we don't have enough time to work within this system, and so it is about social change. It's about I think what Peter's doing and alluding to with the money is he's also being careful not so that his operation doesn't turn into a big bureaucracy. And that was also something that I was very conscious of, because I studied international development and international policy. And you know, it's hard not having tangible results for people who are saying, where's your metrics, where's your impact? But the system itself needs so badly to change if our next generation is going to, you know, have any future worth living. So we're kind of biting it. You know, we're saying, no, let's go for that bigger vision. And the Global Summit, it's still fledgling, but it's saying, let's go all the way. Let's bring all the breakthrough ideas. We know there's cures for AIDS and cancer, and there's free energy systems out there. Why aren't they getting into the market? So it is about creating that critical mass and having a platform for it that makes people feel connected and powerful and creates a sense of security. That's going to be the it. And if I can see it in my lifetime or in the next few years, that'll be fantastic. Somebody mentioned natural capitalism here, and also Paul Hawkins, who is a co-author with Hunter Levin. And this idea of putting value on what's sustainable is where our economy needs to shift. And so it's saying, you know, how can we create and agree to a new system that will actually reverse the whole paradigm and create incentives for locally led solutions instead of putting all of the philanthropy funding into target issues. And so it's going to take this group think with a whole lot more transparency. And yeah, so just from 2001, when I actually was starting out with Empowerment Works, into 2007 to say let's get beyond, you know, just one organization and doing our grassroots work, but let's invite in the whole collective to co-create a new system and implement that. That's been the transition for me. And to move past monetary solutions. Oh, did I cut out?
Sorry, I missed the end of that. You did just
a little bit, but I think the final point that you just made was about, you know, moving past monetary solutions is probably a good point, I think, to finish the official webinar recording on, and we can carry on talking at this particular point. But what you and Peter have both highlighted, I feel, is the recognition that deep down inside each of us, this is something that our piece of cake participant has mentioned. If you can find a way of manifesting about it some way, if you can think it, it can happen. Normally, I think it changes in a slightly different way. It's not about thinking things; it's more to do with feeling. If you feel strongly enough, you will find the ways to think, which will enable you to change the way you act. And I think that's what's happening at the moment. The only difference between now and history, what's been happening in history, is people are beginning to feel much more strongly about what's going on with their world. And as a consequence, they're stamping their feet and they're clapping their hands and they're saying, we don't want to feel this way about ourselves or the world. So I think that's the biggest change maker. When people's feelings get shifted, then that's usually also when paradigms shift, because people just don't put up with stuff anymore. And they say, we've got to look at not just what we shouldn't have, but we also got to look at what we should have, which are 2 points that Peter makes in the Zeitgeist movie. Can I just finish by both of you perhaps sharing how you feel, what kind of feelings do you think people need to engage with and respect in order to start making a difference in the world? Melanie, why don't you say something?
I feel like we'll be more secure when we realize collaboration is, that's what creates the security. I think that's the shift. So whatever we have to contribute in finding ways that are non-monetary, but how we can co-create security together through collaboration. That's what's driving me. So it feels good to be doing that with you.
Yeah, and as you know, we're doing some collaboration webinars and events over the coming weeks in GlobalNet21. The first one is on July the 30th, intergenerational collaboration, looking at how younger people and older people can help each other out. whether technology can be used to help assist older people, whether the wisdom of older people could somehow be passed on in a form that's relevant for the era that young people are currently living in. That'll be on the 30th of July, I believe, so that's something really worthwhile checking into. It seems to be the theme, really, even with Peter's movie and the movement. One thing that we all have in our hearts is the desire not to have to compete, but to recognise the value of collaboration. If it wasn't for collaboration, you know, I wouldn't be certainly working with you, Melanie, in the coming month, or even had my first opportunity to connect with you, Peter. So why don't you perhaps say the final words, Peter, on if you were to go into your heart, you know, where would you think people need to connect into with regards to their feelings if they're going to trigger some change in the world?
Was that question towards me? Because you dropped there for a second.
Yeah, it's specifically towards you, Peter. Where in your heart do you think people need to connect into with regards to their feelings specifically? What feelings do they need to tap into in order to step up and start to make a difference in the world?
I would put that subject in a broader context with respect to the pressures of the society and the unfortunate apathy that exists in the West. So when it comes to feeling, the problem is most don't feel in the way that they really should. There's what I would call an empathetic destruction. There's an empathy destroyer thing happening throughout our world because of the way that the social system is set up. And we, as I mentioned earlier, many people, they passively accept the death and disorder that occurs on this planet on a daily basis. They passively accept their own inhibition and their slavery and their terrible food production. They passively accept these things for various reasons, either because they don't know better or they just are literally apathetic, which unfortunately is something that, again, is drilled into this culture quite well. So when it comes to the way people feel, it's really a waking up process in a lot of ways. It's beginning to see things in a parallel way, seeing others as yourself, begin to realize that your integrity is only as good as the integrity of everyone else on the planet. If some individual in the Middle East is being oppressed by whatever things the West might be doing, and they decide they've had enough, and they come to Los Angeles, and I'm sitting in a restaurant somewhere and a bomb goes off behind me, that has a direct repercussion for me because of what our government or whatever practice is happening in the world is doing. So there's a constant symbiotic relationship that unfortunately is not recognized within the human sphere, the human consciousness, or whatever you want to call it. And that's a really sad reality that we have today. We got to remember that the West has been exploiting the rest of the world for so long, and that most of the people and of course the West is where the majority of the power is now too, in general, both military and financial, they are not really that motivated to affect change because they really don't see past all the fruits that they've gained. They haven't experienced what it's like to have a complete drought and to not have food. And that's what we call in the movement the biosocial pressure. To conclude, I'll say that the feeling that people are going to have over time is going to be quite detrimental, not because they've awakened to the feeling, but because the environment is going to begin to shut them down. There's an unsustainable reality out there, and it's going to evolve into more conflict, into worse public health, rising disease, cancer, mental illness rates. All of these trends are in full force right now. And the only problem to me, frankly, when it comes to these pressures is that people haven't experienced them to the capacity that they will if things aren't changed. So back to natural law, things are going to change one way or another. It's going to either we adapt quickly and intelligently and move into something that works, or we're going to be forced to do something, either extinguish ourselves or forced to push into other things that we might not have thought about consciously, but nature will guide us one way or another. There's only so long you can walk against the current in an ocean before you hit that point where that ocean just takes you forward. And that's what I want to drill in. And hopefully that feeling will have a positive effect and not simply cause more anger and apathy, which is unfortunately the norm today.
Well, I think what you've finished up on there, which is about anger and apathy, they, in a way, they're kind of yin and yang in terms of the way that people respond.
Right.
And it's a good point to finish on, because I think if people at least, I don't know what the word is, if they're at least energized, if they feel provoked into doing something, then sometimes provocation is the thing which saves us. It's not something which is necessarily bad. And hopefully, you know, with Melanie and Peter, we've made some provocative statements here today that will make people get up and want to physically move their vision into the real world. And I know there's organisations like Team Humanity that Grant has set up, and his vision is something I looked at recently, and it's something I really, really align to. So Melanie and Peter, you should really check out teamhumanity.com. It's not a case of whether things are adventure yet or not. What matters sometimes is, in the words of, you know, Lao Tzu, when he said a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. What matters is that step is in the right direction. Because if it's not in the right direction, you can go 1,000 miles in the wrong direction, you can come 1,000 miles back, and you can go 1,000 miles in the right direction. So it's really important that our visions are in the right direction. It's not just about taking action and taking steps. We have to be cautious, and we have to be compassionate, and we have to be conscious. So on that point, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today, and thank you, Peter. We'll be sending a recording this out to
please join us next Thursday as well.
With regards to associated materials and documentation as well. So thank you, Melanie, and thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Yes, we'll be here next Thursday for another Global Summit webinar, talking about building teams. And how
Thank
do
you, Peter. Thank you, Jazz.
Right
you guys are all amazing. Thanks,
right
everyone.
So do join us for that around the same time next week. Check out the GlobalNet21 site for the full details. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Melanie.
Thank you. Same to you. Take care.